I stood on my porch, coffee mug gripped tight in my hand, watching in disbelief as workers hammered stakes into my lawn. Wedding chairs were arranged in neat rows across my garden beds. String lights hung from my oak trees. Karen, clipboard in hand, directed traffic like a field marshal. "You cannot be here," I called out, my voice trembling with rage. She looked up, smiled that plastic smile, and said, "Actually, according to HOA bylaws, we can. The board approved it." That was when I noticed the paintball company truck pulling into my driveway right on schedule. The workers froze. Karen's smile vanished. The timing could not have been more perfect. Sometimes the best revenge is not just well planned, it is perfectly legal. My corner property was the envy of the neighborhood. 3 years of weekends spent on hands and knees, pulling weeds, planting perennials, and designing a landscape that brought me peace after long days at the office. The backyard was my masterpiece, a half-acre of rolling green with mature oak trees providing dappled shade over a stone patio I had installed myself. A small pond with koi attracted butterflies and birdsong. It was my sanctuary in an otherwise ordinary suburban development. I first met the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association board 6 months after moving in. The quarterly meeting was held in the community center, a room filled with folding chairs and neighbors I had barely met. The board members sat at a long table at the front, an arrangement that immediately established the hierarchy. 4 retired professionals and Karen Winters, a woman in her 50s with highlighted blonde hair, cut in what could only be described as the uniform of women who demanded to speak to managers. The meeting began with discussions about community improvements and quickly devolved into violations. Karen leaned forward into the microphone when her turn came. "We have noticed several properties failing to maintain standards," she announced, clicking through a slideshow of neighborhood infractions. Dead flowers, misplaced trash cans, a basketball hoop left in a driveway. Her tone carried judgment with each image. I escaped that first meeting without citation, but I soon learned that Karen was the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. She walked the development daily, yellow notepad in hand, documenting violations with photographs she would submit to the board. Her position as HOA president gave her powers she wielded like a scepter. Our first direct interaction came 3 months later when she stopped at my mailbox. "Your grass is a 1/4 inch too high," she informed me without greeting, "and those hydrangeas are not on the approved plant list." I promised to check the bylaws, which seemed to satisfy her temporarily. I did not cut my grass, but I did review the 74-page HOA covenant. Sure enough, grass heights were specified, but hydrangeas were not explicitly forbidden. The following year brought periodic skirmishes. A notice about my garbage can being visible from the street. A warning about holiday decorations left up 3 days past the January deadline. Each interaction strengthened my resolve to maintain cordial relations while protecting my rights as a homeowner. I attended every board meeting, familiarized myself with the bylaws, and tried to be reasonable. At the spring meeting, Karen announced her daughter Whitney's engagement with the enthusiasm usually reserved for royal weddings. "The ceremony will be in June at Lakeside Chapel," she informed everyone, "with a reception at the country club." The community collectively nodded their approval. I genuinely offered congratulations when we crossed paths at the community mailboxes, despite our history of tension. Karen seemed momentarily human as she described her daughter's plans, and I thought perhaps this personal happiness might soften her rule enforcement. I noticed her studying my yard with increased interest in the following weeks. She would slow her walk when passing my house, her gaze lingering on the spacious backyard. At the time, I thought she was simply admiring the spring bulbs that had begun to emerge. I did not recognize the calculation in her eyes or understand that she was measuring my sanctuary for invasion. The first direct violation of my property occurred on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I returned from work to find 3 women walking my backyard with measuring tapes extended between them. One held a notebook, sketching what appeared to be a layout. They froze when I approached, exchanging glances before the notebook woman called out, "Karen said it would be fine." I stood at my back gate, briefcase still in hand. "What exactly would be fine?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level despite the intrusion. Before they could answer, a silver SUV pulled into my driveway, and Karen emerged carrying a binder labeled "Wedding" in elaborate script. "Oh good, you are home," she said, approaching with the confidence of someone who had never been denied access anywhere. "We are just getting some preliminary measurements for the rehearsal dinner setup. Your yard has the perfect configuration for what Whitney envisions." The presumption left me momentarily speechless. Karen continued walking toward the women, pointing toward my oak trees. "The tables would go here, with string lights overhead. The bar could be set up near the pond." She spoke as if my permission was a mere formality. "Karen," I finally managed, "no one asked if my yard could be used for any wedding events." I kept my tone neutral, though my heart raced with the violation. She turned, her expression a mixture of surprise and dismissal. "We are just looking right now. The official request will come through the HOA. Your yard is perfect for community functions according to Section 12 of the bylaws." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "We would only need it for the rehearsal dinner and perhaps some pre-wedding photographs. The wedding itself is at the chapel, of course." Before I could respond, the women continued their measuring as if the matter was settled. I stood in my own yard feeling oddly like a trespasser. That evening, I reviewed Section 12 of the bylaws. It referenced community access to shared spaces like parks and the clubhouse, but said nothing about private backyards. 3 days later, an official letter arrived on HOA letterhead. The board requested the use of my property for a community celebration on specific dates in June, coinciding with Whitney's wedding festivities. The letter implied this was a reasonable accommodation expected of community members, citing vague bylaw provisions about neighborhood harmony and special circumstances. I drafted a polite but firm response declining the request, explaining that my yard was not available for private events. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office, where the part-time administrator promised to distribute it to board members. The following week, board members began appearing at my door individually. First came Robert from down the street, explaining how the venue Whitney wanted had suddenly become unavailable. Then Margaret stopped by, reminiscing about how the community had always come together for special occasions. The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. Karen's approach was less nuanced. She cornered me at the mailboxes, her voice carrying for all to hear. "The board is very disappointed in your unwillingness to support Whitney's special day. Everyone else has offered to help." The public shamming was deliberate, causing several neighbors to glance my way with apparent disapproval. Despite my clear communication, planning continued. I returned home one evening to find small flags marking spaces in my yard, clearly indicating table placements. Another day, I discovered wedding vendors testing soil conditions for a potential dance floor installation. Each time, I removed the markers and sent registered letters documenting the trespassing. The situation escalated when I arrived home early from work to find workers actually installing decorative arches at my property line. "We have permission," they insisted, showing me an email from Karen that claimed, "The homeowner is aware and has approved installation." I explained they were trespassing and asked them to leave immediately. They complied reluctantly, leaving behind half-assembled structures and confused expressions. My phone rang 20 minutes later, Karen demanding to know why I had harassed her vendors. The conversation ended with her ominous promise that the board would address my obstructionism at the next meeting. Her daughter Whitney appeared at my door the following Sunday, all smiles and wedding excitement. Mom said there might be some confusion about the rehearsal dinner, she began sweetly. I just wanted to come by personally to tell you how perfect your yard would be for our celebration. Her approach was manipulative but effective, making me the villain who would ruin a bride's special day. I gently explained my position, offering congratulations on her engagement while maintaining my boundaries. Her smile faded quickly. Mom said you would be difficult, she said, dropping the pretense. She also said the HOA has ways of handling problem residents. The threat hung between us as she returned to her car. The conflict was escalating beyond private property disputes into something more concerning. I began documenting every interaction meticulously, saving emails, photographing unauthorized yard entries, and recording dates and times of conversations. I sent a certified letter to the entire HOA board outlining my position and requesting immediate cessation of all planning activities involving my property. The response came in the form of an emergency board meeting, to which I was summoned via formal notice. The community center was unusually full that evening, with neighbors I rarely saw in attendance. Karen had mobilized her supporters, I realized, as I took a seat in the back row. The meeting began with Karen presenting what she called a community opportunity. Her slideshow displayed professional sketches of my backyard, transformed with wedding elements, tables, lighting, floral arrangements. The Winters Hamilton rehearsal dinner would be a showcase event for our neighborhood, she explained, never once acknowledging it was my private property being showcased. When my turn to speak came, I calmly presented the documented timeline of unauthorized access, the clear language in the HOA covenants protecting private property rights, and state laws regarding trespassing. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as I displayed photographs of workers on my property without permission. Nobody likes a resident who does not support community spirit, Karen responded, effectively dismissing legal concerns in favor of emotional manipulation. This is about being a good neighbor. Several board members nodded in agreement. Robert, the treasurer, attempted mediation. Perhaps we could offer some compensation for lawn usage, he suggested, missing the fundamental issue of consent and boundaries. The meeting ended with the board voting to further review the situation, but Karen's triumphant expression suggested she considered the matter settled in her favor. As people filed out, an older gentleman I had never met touched my shoulder. They did this to the Hendersons last year for the community picnic, he whispered. Destroyed their garden and never paid for repairs. That conversation led to connections with other residents who had experienced Karen's overreach. The Patels had been fined repeatedly for cultural decorations Karen deemed non-conforming. The Wilsons had fought a 6-month battle over a therapeutic backyard pond for their special needs son. Each story revealed a pattern of selective enforcement and personal vendettas disguised as rule adherence. I consulted with a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Her advice was clear: document everything, communicate in writing, and know that while I was legally protected, the social and financial costs of fighting could be substantial. HOAs often count on residents giving in rather than fighting prolonged battles, she explained. Armed with legal clarity, I sent another certified letter outlining my attorney's assessment and explicitly denying permission for any access to my property. I installed security cameras covering all entry points to my yard and posted small but visible, no trespassing signs at property boundaries. Karen's response was a violation, notice claiming my security cameras were unapproved exterior modifications, and the signs violated aesthetic standards. The pettiness of the retaliation was almost comical, but it signaled her determination to punish my resistance. Whitney made a second attempt at persuasion, arriving with her fiancé and wedding planner. Their approach was more direct. "We could pay a reasonable fee for yard usage," the fiancé offered, as if my objection was merely financial. The wedding planner added that they would handle all setup and breakdown professionally, with minimal disruption. I maintained my position, explaining that my yard was not available for events regardless of compensation. Whitney's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mom said this would not be a problem. The invitations have already gone out with your address for the rehearsal dinner." Their departure was followed by Karen's phone call that evening. "You are making this unnecessarily difficult," she said without preamble. "The wedding planning continues with or without your blessing. The HOA has authority to designate temporary community use spaces under emergency provisions." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me with the distinct impression that traditional negotiation had failed completely. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 2 weeks. I returned home one Tuesday to find a rental company truck parked in front of my house. Workers were unloading tables and stacking them against my fence. A woman with a clipboard directed them while consulting a layout diagram. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching quickly. "You do not have permission to be here or to leave any equipment on my property." The clipboard woman looked confused. "We have a confirmed delivery order for the Winters Hamilton wedding. The HOA president authorized access." She showed me a form with Karen's signature, listed as property representative. I explained the situation, showing identification proving my ownership. The workers began reloading equipment, but not before Karen's silver SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. She stormed toward us, phone in hand. "Stop interfering with approved community activities," she demanded loudly enough for neighbors to hear. The board voted to designate this space for the event under Section 23 emergency provisions. "There is no emergency, Karen," I responded evenly. "And Section 23 applies to natural disasters and public safety issues, not wedding rehearsals." Her face flushed. "The board determines what constitutes an emergency. The rental company has a contract." She turned to the workers. "Continue with the delivery as planned. If he interferes, we will contact authorities." The absurdity of threatening to call police on a homeowner protecting their property might have been laughable if not so infuriating. The rental company supervisor arrived, assessed the dispute, and wisely chose to reschedule delivery when the situation is resolved. Karen left, but the incident marked a significant escalation. That evening, board member Margaret visited, visibly uncomfortable with her mission. "Karen asked me to deliver this," she said, handing me an envelope containing a formal HOA violation notice. The alleged violations included obstruction of community functions and creating a hostile environment, both fabricated charges not found in any bylaw. "Margaret," I said quietly, "you know this is wrong." She would not meet my eyes. "The board serves at the pleasure of the president," she murmured before hurrying away. The following morning revealed landscapers in my yard, measuring and marking areas. When confronted, they produced an official-looking work order for event preparation signed by the board. I asked them to leave immediately, which they did after calling their supervisor. By afternoon, Similar workers returned with a police escort Karen had arranged. The officer, to his credit, reviewed my property documents carefully. "This appears to be a civil dispute," he explained to Karen, who had materialized to observe. "The HOA cannot authorize work on private property without owner consent, regardless of bylaws." He advised her to pursue proper channels for any disputes. She departed without acknowledging me, but her expression promised retaliation. The next escalation came in the form of community pressure. Neighbors who had never shown interest in my life suddenly expressed concern about my attitude problem. Some suggested I was selfish for not supporting a young couple's wedding dreams. Others hinted that non-cooperation could lead to increased scrutiny of my property for violations. Each day brought new intrusions. I installed a lock on my gate, only to find it mysteriously damaged. I erected temporary fencing, which received immediate violation notices for unapproved structures. When I left for work, I would return to find evidence of trespassing, moved furniture, disturbed landscaping, or wedding planning materials left conspicuously on my porch with notes about proper community spirit. The situation reached its breaking point when I returned from a grocery run to find my backyard transformed. Tables had been delivered and arranged throughout the space. White wooden chairs formed neat rows near my pond. String lights hung from my oak trees. A small platform for musicians stood near my patio. Karen, Whitney, and the wedding planner stood in the center of my yard, discussing placement of additional elements. They froze when they saw me, but Karen quickly recovered her composure. "The board executed its authority while you were out," she stated triumphantly. "As you can see, preparations are well underway. Fighting this will only make you look unreasonable to the entire community." I surveyed the invasion of my sanctuary, noting damaged plants, compacted soil from heavy equipment, and stakes driven into my carefully maintained lawn. 3 years of weekend work altered without permission or care. The casual violation of my space felt deeply personal, an erasure of boundaries both physical and psychological. "You have 1 hour to remove everything," I stated with a calm that surprised even me. "After that, anything remaining becomes my property to dispose of as I see fit." Whitney looked uncertain for the first time. "Mom, maybe we should." "Absolutely not," Karen interrupted. "He is bluffing. The HOA has authority here." She turned to me with practiced condescension. "These items are staying. The rehearsal dinner is in 3 days. Your continued obstruction will result in fines and potential legal action for interfering with contractual obligations." I did not argue further. Instead, I called my attorney, photographed all damage and unauthorized items, and began methodically documenting each violation. As the hour deadline approached, neither Karen nor the wedding items had moved. They departed eventually, Karen pausing at the gate to deliver what she clearly thought was the final word. "The community has spoken," she announced grandly. "Sometimes you need to accept when you have lost." Her smile was cold as she added, "The wedding vendors arrive tomorrow to complete setup. I suggest you make yourself scarce to avoid further embarrassment." That night, I sat on my patio surrounded by wedding preparations not of my choosing, feeling violated in a space that had once brought peace. Neighborhood social dynamics had been weaponized against me, legal protections ignored, and reasonable boundaries trampled. Conventional responses had failed completely. The situation required an unconventional solution that would restore the boundaries while remaining within legal limits. I made a phone call to an old friend I had not spoken to in months, one whose business might offer the perfect solution to my problem. The following morning found me at Riverside Coffee meeting Mike Donovan, an old college friend who owned Adventure Zone, the largest paintball and airsoft facility in the county. We had played recreational paintball together years ago before losing touch when careers took us in different directions. So you need a legitimate business use for your property that happens to conflict with this wedding thing, Mike summarized after hearing my situation. His expression shifted from concern to amusement. And it needs to be perfectly legal. I nodded, stirring my black coffee absently. The HOA has overstepped completely, but fighting them directly is not working. I need to change the parameters. Mike opened his laptop and pulled up several documents. Private property recreational use falls under different ordinances than residential or commercial classifications, he explained. As the property owner, you have the right to authorize temporary recreational activities provided they meet safety and insurance requirements. We spent the next hour reviewing county ordinances, liability waivers, and temporary land use agreements. Mike's business regularly contracted with private landowners for special events, giving him expertise in navigating the legal requirements. By our second coffee, a plan had taken shape. We could run a special training session for our advanced players, Mike suggested. They are always looking for new terrain challenges. Your yard has excellent natural features for a tactical course. He showed me photos of similar setups on his phone. We use specialized low-impact paintballs for residential adjacent locations, and all participants sign comprehensive liability waivers. The elegance of the solution appealed to me immediately. A legitimate business agreement for a lawful recreational activity would trump any HOA emergency provision claims. We scheduled the event for Saturday, coincidentally the exact day of Whitney's wedding rehearsal dinner. That afternoon, I visited the county clerk's office to obtain proper permits for a temporary recreational event. The clerk seemed unsurprised by the request. We get these for backyard archery tournaments, weekend martial arts classes, all sorts of things, she explained while processing my paperwork. As long as you meet safety requirements and have proper insurance coverage, you are well within your rights. Mike provided professional insurance documentation covering all participants and potential property damage. We signed a formal land use agreement with detailed terms and compensation. Everything was notarized and filed with appropriate authorities. The next step required careful notification to preserve both legal standing and the element of surprise. I drafted a formal notice to the HOA board and surrounding neighbors informing them of the private recreational event, scheduled for Saturday. The notice included all permit numbers, safety protocols, and a contact number for any concerns. I sent these via certified mail with delivery confirmation, ensuring they would arrive Friday morning. Enough time to satisfy notification requirements, but too late for effective counteraction. My attorney reviewed all documentation and confirmed my position was legally sound. The HOA has no grounds to prevent a permitted recreational activity on private property, she assured me. Their event has no legal standing whatsoever since you never authorized it. Friday morning, I took a personal day from work to meet Mike and his team for course setup. They arrived in several vans marked with the Adventure Zone logo, carrying inflatable barriers, course markers, and safety equipment. The professional installation transformed my yard from an unauthorized wedding venue into a legitimate paintball course within hours. The wedding decorations presented an interesting challenge. We cannot legally move their property, Mike noted, examining the tables and chairs scattered across my yard, but we can design the course around them. His team worked efficiently, incorporating the wedding elements into the tactical layout. Tables became cover positions. Chair rows formed natural corridors for strategic movement. The small music platform made an excellent elevated sniper position. By afternoon, transformation was complete. Safety netting surrounded the property perimeter to protect neighboring homes. Professional course markers established boundaries and team positions. Referee stations were positioned at key points for game management. Everything met or exceeded county safety requirements for recreational activities. The certified mail deliveries began arriving at their destinations around 11 a.m. My home security cameras captured the HOA administrator reading the notice with growing concern before making an urgent phone call. Within an hour, Karen's silver SUV pulled up in front of my house. She remained inside for several minutes, observing the activity through her windshield, her expression transitioning from confusion to disbelief to outrage. When she finally approached, clipboard in hand and heels sinking into my lawn, she was met by Mike in his official Adventure Zone jacket. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked pleasantly. "What is happening here?" she demanded, gesturing at the transformed landscape. "This property is reserved for a wedding event tomorrow." Mike maintained professional composure. "This property is contracted for a private recreational event with all proper permits and insurance. I would be happy to show you our documentation." He presented the folder containing all legal paperwork, including my signed authorization as property owner. Karen snatched the folder, flipping through documents with increasing agitation. "This is impossible. The HOA approved use of this property for my daughter's wedding rehearsal." "Without the owner's consent," I added, joining them at the property line, "which makes any such approval invalid." Karen's phone was already at her ear. "Emergency board meeting. Now," she snapped before returning to her car. Her parting glare promised consequences, but for the first time in months, I felt the balance of power shifting in my favor. That evening, I received notice of an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for 7 p.m. Unlike previous confrontations, I approached this one with complete confidence, documentation in hand and legal position secure. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for both a paintball event and a wedding rehearsal. I stood on my porch at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, watching the sunrise illuminate my transformed yard. The paintball course looked professional and purposeful, with its bright barriers and clearly marked safe zones. In the distance, I could see cars beginning to gather at the community center, where the emergency HOA meeting had produced no actionable results the night before. Mike arrived with his staff at 8 a.m. to prepare for the 10 a.m. event start. Participants would begin arriving at 9:30 for safety briefings and equipment distribution. 24 players had registered, a full complement for the course size. "Everything is in order," Mike confirmed, reviewing final safety checks. "All participants have submitted signed waivers. The county inspector approved the course set up yesterday afternoon." He handed me a bright vest with "Field Owner" printed across the back. "You might want to wear this. It identifies you as authorized personnel during the event." At 9:15, the wedding planner's car pulled into my driveway. She emerged looking harried, clipboard clutched against her chest. Behind her came 2 catering vans and a florist's delivery truck. They all stopped abruptly at the sight of the transformed yard. The wedding planner approached cautiously, taking in the inflatable barriers, the safety netting, and the referees in bright jerseys. "There must be some mistake," she began, voice rising with anxiety. "We have setup scheduled for the Winters Hamilton rehearsal dinner today." Mike stepped forward in his official capacity. "No mistake, ma'am. This property is contracted for a private recreational event today. All permits and insurance are in order." He showed her the documentation folder we had prepared for exactly this purpose. But the wedding rehearsal dinner is tonight. 60 guests are expected. The invitations were sent weeks ago. Her professional composure was cracking visibly as she pulled out her phone. While she made frantic calls, the first paintball participants began arriving, carrying gear bags and chatting excitedly about the unique course layout. They moved to the designated preparation area, where referees conducted equipment checks and safety briefings. Karen's silver SUV screeched to a halt at the curb 10 minutes later. She emerged wearing a pantsuit clearly intended for wedding preparations rather than neighborhood disputes. Whitney and her fiancé followed, both looking shocked as they took in the scene. "What have you done?" Karen demanded, marching toward me. "Remove this immediately. The vendors are here to set up for my daughter's wedding event." I maintained the calm I had practiced for this moment. "Good morning, Karen. As you were informed yesterday, my property is contracted for a legitimate recreational event today. All permits are in order, proper notifications were sent, and safety protocols meet county requirements." "This is deliberate sabotage," she shouted, loud enough for neighbors to hear. Several had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the unusual activity and raised voices. The wedding planner joined us, her expression grim. "Mrs. Winters, we have a serious problem. I cannot set up in these conditions. The liability issues alone." "Call your HOA attorney," Karen interrupted, already dialing on her own phone. "Tell him to get an emergency injunction." While she made her call, Whitney approached me directly, her fiancé beside her. "Please," she said quietly, "this is our wedding weekend. Couldn't you have chosen another day for this?" Her genuine distress almost made me reconsider, until I remembered the trampled garden beds, the ignored boundaries, the community manipulation. "Your mother chose my property without permission," I responded evenly. "I never agreed to host any wedding events despite sending multiple written refusals. I am simply using my property for a legitimate purpose that I did authorize." The HOA attorney arrived 30 minutes later, reviewed all documentation, and delivered the verdict Karen clearly was not expecting. "The property owner has followed all legal requirements for this recreational event," he explained reluctantly. "The HOA has no authority to override county permits for legitimate use of private property." "What about the emergency provision we invoked?" Karen demanded. The attorney shook his head. "That provision applies to community safety issues, not private events. Furthermore, it cannot be applied to private property without owner consent except in actual emergencies like fire or flood." By 10:30 a.m., the paintball event was in full swing. Referees monitored safety, while participants navigated the course in tactical formations. The low-impact paintballs made distinctive splat sounds against barriers and protective gear. Wedding vendors departed one by one, unable to work under the circumstances. The catering manager expressed particular concern about food safety with paintball activity nearby. Karen made increasingly desperate phone calls, her voice carrying across the yard as she sought alternative venues on zero notice. Whitney sat in her car, occasionally wiping tears. The fiancé paced the sidewalk, clearly torn between supporting his bride and recognizing the legal reality of the situation. Board members began arriving individually, drawn by the neighborhood spectacle. Robert approached me directly while Karen was occupied with her phone. "You know, we tried to tell her this was going too far," he admitted quietly. "She convinced everyone you would eventually give in to community pressure." Margaret joined us, nodding in agreement. "Karen has been using the HOA to settle personal scores for years. Most of us were too afraid of becoming targets to oppose her. As morning turned to afternoon, the full extent of Karen's manipulation became clear through conversations with board members and neighbors. She had repeatedly misrepresented board decisions, selectively enforced rules against residents who opposed her, and used HOA funds for pet projects without proper approval. My situation was merely the latest and most public example of her overreach. The paintball event continued successfully, participants enthusiastically navigating the unique course layout. Several commented on the interesting incorporation of wedding elements, unaware of the drama behind their presence. Mike ran the event with professional efficiency, ensuring all safety protocols were strictly followed. By 4 p.m., the wedding situation had reached its crisis point. With the rehearsal dinner scheduled for 6 p.m. and no venue secured, Karen finally acknowledged defeat. The last wedding vendor departed, taking the final chairs and tables that had been delivered without permission. Whitney and her fiancé left to inform guests of the cancellation, their relationship with Karen visibly strained by her mishandling of the situation. As Karen prepared to leave, she paused at my property line. Her carefully maintained facade had cracked, revealing the frustration beneath. "You have no idea what you have done," she said, her voice low and intense. "This community will hear about how you ruined a young couple's wedding." I met her gaze steadily. "The community has already seen how you attempted to take someone's private property without permission. They have also seen documentation of every reasonable attempt I made to resolve this situation before today." I gestured towards several neighbors still watching from the sidewalk. "Transparency is a powerful thing, Karen." She departed without further comment, leaving behind the wreckage of plans built on entitlement and manipulation. As the afternoon continued, the true resolution began taking shape, not through confrontation, but through the community witnessing the consequences of unchecked authority. The paintball event concluded successfully at 5 p.m. Participants departed with enthusiastic reviews of the course design and professional management. Mike's team efficiently removed all equipment and barriers, carefully restoring my yard to its original condition. By sunset, only faint indentations in the grass remained as evidence of the day's activities. "That was our most successful special event this season," Mike commented as we completed the final walkthrough. "Several players asked if we might do this again." He handed me a rental payment check, a legitimate business transaction that reinforced the legal standing of everything that had transpired. News traveled quickly through the neighborhood. While Whitney and her fiancé had managed to secure the community center for a scaled-down rehearsal dinner, the story of how their original plans collapsed spread through conversations and text messages. For once, the neighborhood gossip network worked in my favor as accurate information replaced Karen's narrative. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor, Robert, the HOA treasurer, bearing a folder of documents and an apologetic expression. "The board held an emergency session last night," he explained as I offered him coffee on the patio. "Several decisions were made that you should know about." The folder contained a formal apology from the HOA board, acknowledging the improper attempts to use my property without consent. More significantly, it included documentation of a unanimous vote, minus Karen, to implement new policies regarding board transparency and limitations on emergency provisions. "Karen resigned as president effective immediately," Robert continued. "The attorney advised that her actions exposed the entire board to potential liability. No one wanted to risk that continuing." Over the next week, additional board members visited individually, each sharing stories of Karen's previous overreach and their relief at the change in leadership. Margaret brought homemade cookies and asked thoughtful questions about my landscaping techniques. Jack from 3 doors down offered to help repair damaged areas of my garden where wedding preparations had disrupted plantings. Whitney and her fiancé stopped by the following weekend. Their wedding had proceeded at the original chapel location, with the reception at the country club as planned. Only the rehearsal dinner had required last-minute changes. "We wanted to apologize," the fiancé said, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "We should have respected your refusal from the beginning instead of allowing Karen to convince us we could proceed without permission." Whitney nodded in agreement. Mom has always believed rules were flexible for her purposes. This situation has forced some difficult but necessary conversations about boundaries. Her expression suggested those conversations had been painful but productive. The most significant neighborhood change came 2 weeks later at the quarterly HOA meeting. Attendance reached record numbers as residents curious about recent events filled the community center. Robert, serving as interim president, outlined proposed bylaw amendments specifically protecting private property rights from board overreach. During open comments, several residents shared their own experiences with selective enforcement and intimidation under Karen's leadership. What began as a property dispute had catalyzed a community conversation about governance, fairness, and mutual respect. I was approached afterward by the nominations committee about considering a board position in the upcoming election. "We need people who understand both rights and responsibilities," the committee chair explained. "Your handling of a difficult situation demonstrated that balance." My yard gradually returned to its sanctuary state. New plantings replaced damaged areas. The pond filtration system was upgraded. Weekend mornings again found me kneeling in garden beds, hands in soil, creating the peaceful space that had drawn me to the property initially. Karen listed her house for sale in May. Neighbors reported she had purchased a condominium in a neighboring development, one without an HOA. Whitney visited occasionally, our relationship evolving into an unexpectedly cordial acquaintance built on mutual respect for boundaries. The paintball course returned twice more that year, properly permitted, professionally managed, and enthusiastically attended. Each event was announced with appropriate notice to neighbors, many of whom stopped by to watch from designated safe areas. Some even inquired about participating in future games. The following spring, a new family moved into Karen's former house. I brought welcome cookies and garden cuttings for their landscaping. As we chatted on their porch, the husband mentioned hearing stories about neighborhood dynamics from the real estate agent. "Something about a wedding and paintball?" he asked with curious amusement. I smiled, looking across at my peaceful yard. "Just a lesson about respecting boundaries," I replied, "but I think we all learned it quite thoroughly."